This is episode 16 of a series where we examine the cut content, design, and development of Fallout Tactics. One of the team's final major milestones during development was to make demos for both the single-player and multiplayer game modes. In December of 2000, 3 months before Tactics' release, Forte dropped the single-player demo that includes 2 missions that strangely aren't a part of the main game, named Dirt Haven and the Devil's Graveyard. There's a link below in the description if you want to check them out, but fair warning, the only way I could get them to install was to use compatibility mode for Windows 95. Devil's Graveyard is particularly interesting, as it's the only mission in the entire game that takes place in Chicago, a location that's otherwise only mentioned in dialogue and shown in the intro cinematic. These levels also provide a fascinating look at the game's development, as many elements of the UI are significantly different from the final release. These aren't just low-effort demo missions either. They feature fully voiced dialogue from several voice actors and multiple objectives. The story is centered around a gang of marauders led by a raider named Gargantua, which is such a fucking awesome name.
That's far enough! I knew I smelled brotherhood in the air. I've been studying up on you military types since I first heard you were sniffing around this region. But I gotta tell you, I ain't impressed! What were you going to do anyway? Kill little old Gargantua? I don't think you even have enough ammo to piss me off! And wait, don't tell me. You're all little initiates, aren't you? You mean to tell me that they couldn't even rustle up some paladins to take me on? You know what that is? That's disrespect. Nobody disrespects me! I'm gonna do things to you that a lonely tribal wouldn't do to his neighbor's Brahmin! But don't worry, by that time you'll already be dead. You should have just walked away.
Aspects of the levels were reused for the tutorial missions, but most of these levels, including the voice lines, were sadly scrapped. Creating these levels must have taken a tremendous amount of effort in an already rushed development cycle, and I can't figure out why these weren't implemented into the final game. Despite not being present in the actual game, these missions are ironically still referenced in Tactics. Producer Tony Oakden commented on the demo's development, stating, "Having a short development cycle and clearly defined milestones certainly helped us to focus, to say the least. E3 was our first deadline, and we were due to demonstrate a working multiplayer version of the game. This was a major achievement for us. It also provided a great boost to everyone's morale. During this time, we did drift a bit until we were due to deliver our first single-player demo. It was obvious at this point, in a space of about 3 months, things had gone wrong, and we concluded that we would not be able to get the game finished by October. After this, we reassessed the project and remapped our milestones. Once we'd established attainable milestones, we were able to refocus. Our most important milestones became the single-player demo, which shipped just before Christmas 2000, and the multiplayer demo, which shipped at the end of January 2001. Both these demos could have been very disruptive with regards to completing the final game, but we used them instead to get game-critical stuff finished. The single-player demo was the first time we used a focus group to test the whole combat system, and the results were very encouraging. The multiplayer demo gave us the chance to test the GameSpy support and get all of the synchronization issues nailed down. Both demos were very successful in raising the public awareness of the game. Around this time, the developers became aware that Tactics just wasn't fun to play, and they had to rework the foundation of the combat system, as Ed Orman recounted. Finally, for one that was all my fault, when we put together the first demo, there was this realization that it just wasn't any fun. It was one of those points in a project where all of the pieces have been built, but it's not gelling at all. We had a series of very intense meetings. In particular, I remember essentially redesigning the tactical combat with Carl, and got back on track. As Ed mentioned, major revisions were made to nearly every script in January of 2001. It wasn't just combat that was reworked though, but some levels were also far too complex and had to be simplified. Some levels are already labyrinthian in the final game, so I can only imagine just how confusing some of these must have been. Designer Gareth Davies expanded on this part of development, stating, "The team we had for tactics was nothing short of spectacular. We had more than enough enthusiasm to make up for our inexperience, and I never ceased to be amazed at some of the work that was done. I specifically remember being assigned the dubious duty of getting a level created by one of our other designers. It had been built with so much complexity and intricacy that it was like some kind of isometric Escher mindfuck, and too much for a player to face up to." After beating the demo, you're rewarded with some nostalgic late 90s advertisements. The first congratulates you for completing the demo and urges you to buy the game in spring of 2001. The second image promotes a company called Falcon Northwest that assembles high-end computers. The style of these images is fantastic and makes me long for the simpler time they came from. Comparing the item description file from Tactics to the demo reveals some interesting differences. In the final game, the baseball bat weapon is called a slugger, but it was originally named the Louisville Slugger. The water gun was originally called Super Soaker. The Cat's Paw item description in the final game is an issue of Cat's Paw magazine, but that was altered from issue number 4 of the Famous Weapons magazine. Really good article on handguns. On top of being cut from the actual release, the single-player demos also feature some interesting cut content. In the Dirt Haven mission, the player can find an item called Brahmin Horn, and its description reads, "Said to be a powerful aphrodisiac." Concept art reinforces the fact that it was an aphrodisiac, but it's difficult to speculate where this item could have been used. Maybe in one of the cut missions we covered in a previous episode. There's another item called Cockroach Guts that appears in the Devil's Playground, and its description reads, "Useful in the treatment of radiation poisoning. Tastes like chicken, but it sure don't feel like it." Despite that it has no effect and can't be consumed, but its concept art also suggests it was originally meant to heal radiation damage. There's some similar creature-based cut items in the final release, like the giant rat pelt, which still has an icon and a description that states, "This is the dried and cured hide of an enormous rodent. Very warm." There's also an item called Scorpion Tail, which may or may not be used. In multiple playthroughs I've never come across one, but it's possible it's just extremely rare. There's a similar, nearly unattainable item called Komodo Pelt that can only be found during the Komodo Man encounter, which is an homage to Steve Irwin. During the encounter, Komodo Man is almost immediately killed by a Komodo dragon, but if you kill the Komodo dragon and then attack the NPC, it'll draw him to the edge of the fence. Killing him doesn't help as you can't loot his body due to the fence being in the way, but you can pickpocket him. It's extremely difficult to pull off as he has high perception and is looking right at you as you rob him, but if you have a high enough steal skill it is possible. Its description interestingly mentions, "This is the dried and cured hide of the Komodo, used in the creation of leather armor." Throughout this series, we've seen multiple references to some kind of cut crafting system, like Xanderroot and Brockflower, and a crafting system could have been a great addition. While getting footage for this, I noticed a really strange design element, where you can see an NPC's attacks in the inventory menu. I'm not sure why this was added considering it provides little to no purpose, but it's a cool detail regardless. It's likely these creature-based items were all cut, or in the case of the Komodo Pelt essentially cut, because there's bizarrely no option to make actors spawn items on Death and Tactics Engine. Entities have to be carrying items in their inventory already, and if the developers did that, the player could potentially pickpocket rat pelts and Brahmin horns off of living creatures, which would have been really funny, but also very, very dumb. Some of these changes, particularly adding the almost entirely forgotten demo missions to the final release, would have made Tactics into an even better game. Ultimately though, all of this was left on the cutting room floor.